What if the mask you wear to survive this world becomes the monster that destroys you? Ted Kaczynski lived in isolation, not because he was mad, but because he saw too clearly. He rejected technology, not out of ignorance, but from deep understanding. And he killed, not for chaos, but for meaning. Today, we're diving into the darkest corners of human psychology using Carl Jung's lens to uncover a terrifying truth. The persona you build to fit in might be the very thing that tears you apart. This isn't just about a serial killer. It's about us, about you, and what happens when we stop recognizing ourselves behind the masks we wear. We all wear masks. Not literal ones, but psychological disguises we slip on every time we step into the world. Carl Jung called it the persona, the curated version of ourselves we present to society. It's necessary, yes, but dangerous when mistaken for who we truly are. Because when the mask becomes more real than the face beneath it, something inside us begins to rot. That's the persona trap, and Ted Kaczynski didn't just fall into it. He built his entire life around it. Born a child prodigy, Ted was fast-tracked into elite circles far before most could tie their own shoes. He excelled academically, socially adapted, at least on the surface. But beneath that polished exterior lurked a growing discomfort with the world around him. He wasn't broken by trauma. He was fractured by clarity, and that's far more dangerous. Jung believed that the persona is meant to protect us, a kind of social armor. But when we forget we're wearing it, it stops serving us and starts controlling us. Kaczynski wore many personas: the genius, the outcast, the hermit, and finally, the terrorist. Each one carefully constructed. Each one a response to the alienation he felt from a system he once tried to understand, and eventually sought to destroy. His manifesto wasn't written in madness. It was a confession, a desperate attempt to be heard after years of silence. He didn't want to kill, he wanted to awaken, to scream into the void of modern civilization and see if anyone would answer. But somewhere along the way, he stopped being a man trying to make sense of the world and became the myth he created. See, the persona trap doesn't only happen to criminals or extremists. It happens to anyone who loses touch with their true self in pursuit of fitting in, surviving, or even changing the world. When your mask becomes your identity, you stop questioning who you really are, and that's when the shadow takes over. Because Jung warned us, if you don't confront your shadow, you will become it. So ask yourself now, how much of you is real? And how much is just performance? We're just getting started. Stay with me. Because next, we'll explore the moment Ted Kaczynski crossed the line, not as a man making a choice, but as a mask deciding its own fate. There comes a moment in every man's life when he must face the unbearable weight of truth. For Ted Kaczynski, that moment didn't arrive like thunder. It crept in slowly, silently, like fog rolling over a mountain valley. He wasn't born a killer. He was born into a world that made him feel like an outsider in his own skin. And that's where the rot began. Jung spoke often about individuation, the process by which we integrate all parts of the psyche to become whole. But what happens when that integration fails? When instead of embracing our shadow, we deny it? When instead of understanding ourselves, we reject who we are? Ted tried to escape the system because he saw himself in it, and hated what he saw. He looked at modern society and saw control, manipulation, loss of freedom. But more than that, he saw people wearing masks so convincingly that they forgot they were wearing them. And in his mind, he would be the one to tear those masks off, violently if necessary. But here's the twist. The persona isn't just a lie we tell the world. It's also the lie we tell ourselves. Kaczynski believed he was acting out of principle, that each bomb was a message, not a murder, that every death was a necessary sacrifice for awakening humanity. He built a narrative so strong around his mission that he stopped seeing victims, only symbols. This is what Jung feared most, not the shadow itself, but the blindness to it. When we believe we are righteous, even as we commit atrocities, When we convince ourselves we're saving the world while tearing pieces of it apart. Now imagine this happening inside you, not through violence, but through silence, through the slow erosion of authenticity. You start lying to others, then to yourself, and finally you forget what truth even feels like. That's the persona trap, and Ted Kaczynski didn't just fall into it. He lived inside it, comfortably, rationally, dangerously. His cabin in Montana wasn't just a physical retreat. It was a mental fortress, a place where he could write manifestos, build bombs, and justify killings without interference from the outside world. Because once you stop hearing voices that challenge your beliefs, you begin to think your own echo is wisdom. Jung warned us about this. He called it inflation. When the ego becomes inflated by identification with archetypal figures or grandiose roles. In other words, when you start believing you're chosen, destined, prophetic, even divine. And that's exactly what happened to Ted. He stopped being a man. He became the revolutionary, the martyr, the last voice of reason. And when you see yourself that way, morality shifts. Right and wrong blur. And suddenly violence doesn't feel like a crime. It feels like justice. But let me ask you something now. What part of you has been quietly growing in the dark? What belief have you refused to question? What story have you told yourself so many times that you no longer recognize it as a story, but as truth? Because that's how the persona trap works. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on your door. It waits until you're comfortable, until you trust your own reflection, until you can no longer tell the difference between who you are and who you pretend to be. And once that line is crossed, there's no turning back. So stay with me, because next, we're going to dive into the heart of darkness, into the moment when Ted Kaczynski stopped being a thinker and became pure action. Don't look away, because what you're about to hear might reflect something deeper than you expect. There is a moment in every descent into darkness when the individual no longer recognizes the point of return. For Ted Kaczynski, that moment wasn't marked by a single bomb or one specific murder. It was a slow erosion, a quiet surrender to the voice inside him that said, "You are different. You are chosen. You must act." Jung spoke often about the archetypes that shape our unconscious mind. The hero, the child, the sage, the trickster. But there's one archetype he rarely addressed directly, perhaps because it was too uncomfortable to confront. The destroyer. Not the villain, not the madman. The destroyer is the one who believes they're saving the world through annihilation. They don't see chaos. They see purification. They don't hear screams. They hear silence being broken. And they justify every action with the belief that what comes after will be better than what came before. That was Ted. A man who had long abandoned his true self, now fully possessed by an archetype that demanded destruction, not as punishment, but as prophecy. And here's the terrifying part. He didn't wake up one day and decide to become a killer. It was a process, a transformation so subtle that even he might not have noticed it happening. Until one day he looked down at his hands, stained with blood, and still believed he was righteous. This is what happens when we stop listening to the world around us. When we retreat so deeply into our own minds that reality becomes whatever we say it is. Ted built his cabin not just in the wilderness. He built it inside his psyche, a fortress of ideas so impenetrable that no outside voice could reach. Jung called this condition psychic inflation, when the ego identifies so strongly with a powerful inner figure that it loses all sense of proportion. You begin to believe you are not just a person with thoughts, you are the thought itself. And when you're that far gone, morality bends, reality shifts, and violence becomes logic. But let me ask you something now, not as a distant observer, but as someone living in this same world. How many of us are slowly retreating? How many of us are beginning to build our own cabins, not of wood and stone, but of isolation, ideology, and certainty? We may not plant bombs, but we do cut people out. We do stop listening. We do start believing that our pain gives us permission to hurt others, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, because pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, and by the time you realize it's been shaping your beliefs for years, it's already too late. Now imagine living like Ted did, alone in the mountains, surrounded by silence, writing letters to a world that never answers, believing you're the only one awake while everyone else sleeps. Does that sound familiar? Because if it does, you may be closer to the edge than you think. His manifesto was filled with logic, but behind every rational argument was a scream of loneliness, of someone who once tried to connect and failed, who once reached out and was ignored, and who finally decided that if he couldn't be heard, he would make sure he couldn't be ignored. That's not madness. That's despair. And despair has a way of turning even the most intelligent minds into weapons. So ask yourself now, what part of you has been growing in silence? What belief have you refused to question? What story are you telling yourself so often that it no longer feels like a story, but like destiny? Because that's how the persona trap works. Doesn't shout. It seduces. It makes you believe you're evolving, while you're actually unraveling. And when you finally look in the mirror, you won't recognize the face staring back. Stay with me, because next, we're going to uncover the final truth, not just about Ted Kaczynski, but about all of us, about what Jung saw coming, and about what happens when we forget who we really are beneath the masks we wear. Don't look away, because what you're about to hear might change everything. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, not parts of yourself, not the good pieces you show to the world, but all of it. The rage, the doubt, the fear, the violence that lives in every human heart. Because when we refuse to face our full nature, we become dangerous." Ted Kaczynski didn't kill because he was broken. He killed because he believed he was whole. And that's what makes his story so terrifying. Because he wasn't some monster lurking in the shadows. He was a man who stopped questioning himself, who stopped listening, who built a fortress around his beliefs, and locked himself inside. We like to think of him as an outlier, an anomaly, a rare case of madness that could never happen to us. But Jung saw something else. He warned us that when society becomes too disconnected from the unconscious, from dreams, from myth, from instinct, we lose touch with the deeper truths of being human. And when that happens, people start acting out those truths violently. Because if you can't dream your own myth, you'll live someone else's nightmare. Kaczynski was not just a product of his time. He was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when intelligence is divorced from empathy, when logic replaces compassion, when ideology becomes identity, and when the persona becomes the only voice left inside. His cabin in Montana wasn't just a place. It was a state of mind, one we all risk entering, where we stop hearing the world and only listen to ourselves, where certainty becomes more valuable than truth, where pain becomes purpose, and where destruction feels like destiny. This is the persona trap at its final stage. Not just wearing a mask, but forgetting there was ever a face beneath it. And when that happens, the shadow isn't integrated. It erupts, violently, uncontrollably, with no way back. But here's the deeper truth. None of us are immune. Every one of us carries within us the potential for both creation and destruction. For love and for violence. For awakening or annihilation. What separates us from Ted isn't morality. It's awareness, the willingness to look inward, to ask hard questions, to sit in silence long enough to hear the parts of ourselves we usually ignore. Because if we don't confront our shadow, it will find another way to speak. Through addiction, through anger, through isolation, through ideology, and sometimes through action we never thought we were capable of. So I want to leave you with this. Don't just watch this video and walk away thinking about him. Think about yourself. What part of you have you refused to see? What belief have you turned into a religion? What pain have you justified as wisdom? Because the real danger isn't in the past. It's in the present, in the quiet corners of your own mind. in the thoughts you dismiss, in the voices you silence, in the mask you wear so well that even you believe it now. Jung would tell us that the only true path forward is integration, not perfection, not purity, but wholeness, to embrace the light and the dark, to stop pretending we're above our own humanity. Only then can we avoid the trap. Only then can we remain fully human, without becoming monsters. If this resonated with you, if it made you question something deep inside, then do me one favor. Leave a comment, just one word. Whatever came to mind first when you heard the truth, because if we don't speak about these things, someone else will, with a bomb in their hands. Thank you for watching. Stay awake, stay aware, and above all, stay human.